So I've got Tommy joining me. How are you doing, Tommy?
I'm doing good, Ian. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you all right, and I can see you perfectly now, and you're looking nice and relaxed. So, how excited are you about what's happening today? I mean, 100 miles for anybody is huge, but to go for a world record on a treadmill is beyond huge. I find it very frightening and intimidating, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. So exciting, man. Exciting. I'm stoked that I'm not the one on the treadmill, you know? I'm stoked that I get to
I said
sit here.
exactly the same.
I I get to sit here, just drink my coffee and just watch, It's pretty incredible, pretty inspiring.
So you've run 2:18 for the marathon. You're a fast guy, um, and the listeners and the viewers are probably looking on and thinking, "We have a 2:18 is like so quick," but even you are intimidated by what Zach is doing. So from a coach perspective, what does it take for Zach to control himself, to control his pace, to get his body in the right shape to be able to achieve something like this?
Oh man. So well, yeah, great question. You hear people say it's this platitude that people throw out all the time where they say that running is 90% mental and 10% physical, and I call BS on that completely because you know you can have an incredible mindset, but if you haven't put in the work, if you haven't built a body that's able to cover that distance, both systems and structures, you've got to have the connective tissues that are durable enough to be able to handle the distance. And then you got to have systems, your heart, your lungs, your blood, all of those metabolic systems, all of those have to be working together to be able to first just get you to the starting line. And then after that, of course the mental aspect comes in, but man, it's incredible to be able to follow Zach's career, just to see how consistent he is, just how meticulous he is with his training, with his nutrition, with his approach going into an event like this, or honestly going into any event that I've ever been able to watch Zach. He's incredibly dialed, incredibly calculated, and it takes a special person to be able to just have the audacity to attempt something like this, but then being able to back it up and actually perform time after time after time. It's the reason that everybody is here from around the world, all of these incredible athletes rallying around him, because they don't have any doubt that he can actually get the job done. So
yeah, and my initial chat with Don was we started by talking about his 11:19, which he did at the end of last year on the track.
right.
And Don sort of said, well, this record is perfectly achievable for him, and of course it is, but there is no guarantee with 100 miles. And Zach has, in his training, never gone further than 30 miles on a treadmill. Now, of course, there's people all around the world saying, yeah, but he knows how to run 100 miles. But it's not the same, is it?
Right. Yeah. Nothing is ever given. You can never, you can never take for granted, or you can never just expect that it's just going to be given to you. So you can do all the preparation, you can do everything right leading up to it, but you've still got to get the job done. He's still, I guess at this point, he's still 11 hours away from the other side of that, and that's a dark tunnel, or it will be. We'll see.
Well, it will be interesting to see how the day unfolds. Zach talked about three key factors that he was going to use while he was on the treadmill, and one was small benchmarks,
Right.
so intermediate goals, visualization, and then rotating distractions. So maybe from your point of view, just maybe elaborate on some of those tactics and how they work.
Well, so my perspective, I suppose, is a little bit different than Zach. So I've only completed 100 miles, excuse me, just one time, just one single 100-mile race, and that was a few years ago in Colorado. The race was called Run Rabbit Run, so it's a 100-mile race through the Colorado Rockies, and for myself, as I approached that, trying to wrap my head around 100 miles was was too big. It was too much to try to just approach with one single effort. And so what I did for myself, I predicted that it would take right around 18 to 20 hours. And so in my mind, I broke it down into 3 separate 6-hour sessions. And so,
Okay.
I was wearing a watch. I started my watch and I let that watch roll until 6 hours, and then I cleared the watch and completely started over as if I was starting a new race.
Okay.
Because three times 6 hours was for some reason a lot more digestible than 100 miles. For some reason, time is malleable. Time can, you can bend it, you can fold it back on itself. You can get in these states of flow where you can almost speed it up or slow it down. And I think Zach is a master at that. He's a metronome. He can dial in and he can let everything else just fade away, and it becomes a meditative trance where you don't even realize the time as it's ticking by. But for myself, at least, if I'm sitting there watching the miles go by, it just becomes agonizing. It just becomes mind numbing, really. And
yeah. And I think actually this is probably the most demanding element of what Zach is doing here. Is running around a track would be
right.
terribly boring for me. But
I
the
agree.
thing is, at least he is moving, and at least you feel as though you're going somewhere.
Right.
Whereas on the treadmill, he's not going anywhere. He's just basically looking at a wall, sweating, needing to drink, needing to eat, and just constantly going, I'm running at this pace, I'm running at this pace, I'm running at this pace. And there is no distraction. So he's got music, and I know that he's gonna flick things around to try and create mini distractions. And currently Nicole is running next to him on the second treadmill. So there's probably some dialogue going on between them to help with the distraction. But you mentioned running 100 miles on the trail, and how you broke it down into 6 hours. But the thing is with trail is pace is so difficult to control because the terrain controls your pace and it controls your effort. Whereas you know what it takes to run a 2:18 marathon, and you can say, well, I need to run at this pace. And this is the thing that's going to happen with Zach here now. We're getting a progress update. So let's see what. So Zach is through 7 miles in 50 minutes and 23 seconds. So I was saying with Don, I don't know if you saw this, Tommy, but his first 3 miles were a little bit slower than I anticipated. He was running at 7:54 pace, which I was surprised at. But he then seemed to speed up, and that's obviously now reflected in 7 miles in 50:23.
Right. Yeah. I think it definitely was. Well, I would assume that it was intentional, that he started out a little bit easy, and he knows he's got a long ways to go. And there's the ability to prime your systems as you start going. And when you first begin, your body is cold. I mean, literally cold. The temperature is colder. The way that your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, your blood, even the way all of that flows is different based off of the temperature. And so as you start to warm up, and obviously there are limits to that, but as you start to warm up, everything becomes a bit less viscous, and so blood starts to flow better. Your vascular system, your blood vessels, your heart, your lungs, all of that starts to work in concert in a way that a certain pace, which when you're cold and you're first starting out, it may line up with a certain effort, and that may be slower than 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or even 3 hours into it. And I've found personally with myself, I guess I focused the last couple of years more on road marathons, and what I've learned from racing quite a few of those is that you can never project from maybe mile 2 or 3 or even mile 6 or 8 how you're going to feel halfway through or 3/4 through. And what I've found personally is that typically I don't start to feel good in a marathon until mile 15, mile 16, sometimes mile 17, and then everything starts to flow. And a lot of times the pace will be a lot slower in the beginning, and then oddly and somewhat counterintuitively, the pace picks up just naturally, and the rate of perceived exertion, you know, the effort level starts to diminish. You know, if you're looking at metrics, you might find that your heart rate actually decreases, even though the pace is faster later on in the race. And so I think that's calculated. Yeah, I think that's calculated. I think he knows that. You know, there's adrenaline, there's, you know, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, all of that begins to flow